Jesus and his disciples are in Jerusalem, and Greeks come for the festival and come to Philip, one of Jesus' disciples, and say, "We would like to see Jesus." Philip and Andrew go to Jesus and tell him, and Jesus responds with this extraordinary, enigmatic image of the grain of wheat falling in the ground and dying. And then he goes on to talk about his soul being troubled. And we have here in this passage in John's Gospel, we have here John's account of Jesus' own turmoil, which in the other Gospels we hear about in the Garden of Gethsemane. But how does Jesus' response relate to what the Greeks ask? We want to see Jesus. It doesn't make sense until we realise that in John's Gospel, the word see really means something like believe. Sir, we would like to believe in Jesus. We hear Jesus using the same word, as in come and see, to his first would-be disciples at the very beginning of the Gospel. And that means come and be with me and believe. So then Jesus' response begins to make sense. And it says something about believing in me means changing. And that change is like death. And he goes on to talk about, in this passage, we need to hate our lives if we are to save them. If we love our lives, we will lose them. And so we have in this passage this demand, this expectation, the requirement that actually following Jesus involves death. Now, Jesus talks about that in two ways. He talks about it in terms of his own death. And so it is his declaration that the hour is coming, the hour of his death is coming. And his image of the grain of wheat falling into the ground, and unless it dies, it won't be fruitful, is the image he is applying to his own death. That unless he dies, the fruit that he has come to bear, which is the fruit of drawing all people to himself, that all may have life abundantly, that fruit will not happen. He needs to die for it to be true. But he also talks about death in terms of his followers' death. If you serve me, if you follow me, then you must hate your life. And hating is, in this context, is an analogy, is a word that is conveying this sense of letting go of discarding, of dying to aspects of who we are, aspects of what's important to us, aspects of how we live our lives. Death has to happen. We have to discard parts of who we are, aspects of who we are, habits and practices and attitudes, behaviours. We have to discard that for us to be his disciples. That's a hard thing to hear. It's a hard thing to hear, but we know somewhere inside us that that is what it's about, that this journey of faithfulness is about. We have been living in a time of extraordinary death, of pervasive death, of death not just of the appalling loss of life through the coronavirus, but death of ways of life, death of jobs, death of hopes, death of aspirations, death of opportunities, death of relationships. We've been living through that. And as Christians, we have been responding in a whole host of ways, as well as bearing that loss and that suffering ourselves. Responding in ways which have been selfless, have been sacrificial, have been giving of ourselves for the sake of others. And when you think about it, that's what Jesus is talking about. He's talking about dying to those aspects of ourselves that keep us turned in on ourselves. And what's happened through this pandemic, and not just for Christians, but for a whole host of people, is that we've asked some fundamental questions about what really matters. And we're making some choices about discarding those things that we had been holding on to and letting go of them so that we can live more fruitfully. And for a Christian, that living more fruitfully is living less for ourselves and more for others. In John's words, hating our lives so that we might gain our lives, but always for the sake of others, always for the sake of Jesus' ambition, Jesus' aim, Jesus' goal, that all will be drawn to him. So as we think about this passage and reflect on this journey through Holy Week, what I hear for myself today is this challenge to recognise that there are parts of myself that I need to discard, ways of thinking, attitudes, behaviours that I need to let go of. They need to die. But in their dying, then that call that God has placed on me and on each one of us to serve Jesus and follow him, that call will be fruitful. And it will be fruitful because of his death, which is the source of all the fruit of the Spirit, all the fruit of his life in the world, all the fruit that we show and share as we serve him amongst our communities, our neighbours, and the whole world.